clearly working. Okay, maybe we will get started because we have a lot to cover and I want to make sure we're spending our time well. So welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us and hope you're having a great time at TT. It's really great to be back together in person after so many years. I know everybody's very eager to make connections, but my name is Heather Thompson and I am the CEO of ITDP, the Institute for Transportation and Development Policy. It's very nice to be with you all. Just a quick introduction on ITDP. If you don't know who we are, we're a nonprofit organization headquartered in New York City, but with offices all over the world, promoting sustainable transportation for almost 40 years now, predominantly with a focus on the global south. So really excited to be here with all of you today. I want to introduce our panelists, which I'm very honored to be here with today. And then I'm going to do a quick introduction on one of our recent studies at ITDP to set the context for the conversation, and then we'll turn it into hopefully what will be a really dynamic discussion with our great panelists here. And I also want to first thank our sponsor, the Climate Works Foundation, who is not here today, but we're really thankful for their support. So to introduce our panelists, first I have Insa Ilgin, who is the Project Director of Sustainable Mobility at Tumi Volt, and she'll tell you a little bit more about Tumi. We have Nicolas Potier-Tebrij, who is the Global Director of Transportation here at the World Bank. So we're very honored to have him joining us here and to tell us the perspective of the World Bank. Next, we have Fernanda Rivera, who is the Director of Public Transportation and Licensing from the Ministry of Mobility in Mexico City, Mexico. And then finally, we have Margarita Parra, who is the Director of Transportation and International Programs at Clean Energy Works. And I'm not going to tell you too much about them, so they can tell you about themselves and their experience and share their perspective. But again, I want to kick the session off with a little bit of an intro on some recent work that we did at ITDP, and I'm going to stand here at the podium just so that I can point to two slides, only two slides. Don't want to overwhelm you with information, but I do think these images speak a lot. So just wanted to point to them. So to set the context for the conversation, ITDP released in advance of the COP in Glasgow COP, a study which is a fourth in the series called The Compact City Scenario Electrified. And these reports, again, this is a fourth in a series that we've done over about more than 10 years or so. The idea is to look at what we need to do to get to our climate targets. And this report we did with the eye towards electrification. We could see, especially for the UK COP, that there was a lot of excitement around electrification. At ITDP, we are also very excited about electrification, but we wanted to know how far could we really get with electrification alone. And so we looked at four scenarios: what we could get with electrification alone, what we could get with a focus on public transportation, walking, cycling, compact city development, and then what we could get with those two combined compared to a business as usual scenario. And what we found out is, although both of those strategies have huge potential, both electrification and compact city development, we cannot get to our goal without both. We really need both working hand in hand to get to our 1.5 degree target. And I know the panel yesterday at the start of the day really talked about this dichotomy, and I think the real message here is there is no dichotomy. That is a false dichotomy. We really need these strategies working hand in hand. If you could go to the next slide. So not only are they important to get to our climate goals, we also know that they're incredibly important for equity. And here, you see if you're a climate nerd like I am, there's always these emissions mitigation curves. And essentially this shows you, again, what the first picture showed you, which is business as usual is the red line. The only line that gets us within the blue area, our target is, again, working on electrification along with compact city development, walking, cycling, and public transportation. So again, not only do these work in synergy, but also with this strategy, we would reduce our demand for energy by 40%. And we know that the challenge of electrifying our grids, going green with our grids, is already a huge challenge. So the more we can do to essentially keep the cars on the road to a minimum and reduce and electrify the rest, the better that we're doing in terms of also making our challenge around the electricity sector simpler as well. This also would allow us to save $5 trillion by 2050. And again, we know that the costs of this transition are high. We need to do everything that we can do to keep the cost as low as possible. The other incredible thing about these reports is that they actually give us targets for infrastructure investments, targets for buses, e-buses on the road, kilometers of bus infrastructure, cycling infrastructure, number of cycles on the road. So I'll let you dig into that report. But just to give you a couple of figures, by 2030, we need 10 million buses on the road to reach these targets. And we need 100,000 kilometers of bus lanes. That's about $9,000 billion of infrastructure investment. So just to set the context, the challenge is hard. Again, that's why we need these strategies to be working hand in hand. Because of the popularity of this report, we're looking to do roadmaps to be released later this year for China, Indonesia, India, Egypt, South Africa, Brazil, Mexico, Colombia, and the United States. So please stay tuned for those. And again, there'll be great information with targets in there. So with that as a backdrop, we have an esteemed panel with great expertise to share with you all a little bit more from their perspective about how all of these strategies come together and what we need to do to make them a reality in our implementation in the years ahead. So Insa, I want to turn to you first because I want to ask you to share with us a little bit more about Tumi and the eVolt e-bus mission, because it's really at the bullseye of what this report is telling us. We need to have public transportation investments working hand in hand with electrification. So can you tell us a little bit more about that, what you're learning, some lessons for the audience?
Yes, thank you so much. There's also someone getting some Teams messages, so just to be aware. Yes, I'm Insa Irgen. I'm working on behalf of the German Development Collaboration, and what we are doing under the umbrella of Tumi. Tumi is the Transformative Urban Mobility Initiative. We have a so-called e-bus mission. The idea of the e-bus mission actually sparked in 2019 at TT in one of these coffee meetings out there. And so here we are. For us, the e-bus mission has a very ambitious goal, and we want to help the deployment and be ready for procure of selected cities for 100,000 e-buses by 2025. This is for us very uncommon, because usually we have very fluffy titles of programs and we do capacity development, and we are not really keen on putting exact numbers into our goals. But what we think is needed is to be very concrete and be very clear on our targets. So this is why we are so committed with the e-bus mission to actually get to this goal by 2025. We don't do it alone. We do it with 5 partner organizations. ITDP is one of them, C40 is one of them, WRI, and ICLE, UITP, so we have them all together. And we work with selected cities in the Global South to help them to push towards electrification of their bus fleets. And I think some of you have maybe seen the keynote from Andrew Steer yesterday, and that goes in the same direction. We don't need any uncertainty around what is the best direction for public transport, in a sense, in regards to, is it maybe CNG, is it diesel, is it e-fuels, is it biofuels? We know the answers. We have seen all the studies. So let's really go into actions and activities and support the cities in what this means and how we can help them. Of course, we are technical collaboration, so we help with capacity developers with technical advice, but the funding needs to follow. So the idea and the theory of change behind the eBus mission is also to give a market signal, to show actually the funding agencies that there is a demand, so the prices will drop. So this is where we stand with the eBus mission, and happy to be here also a couple of years later, and it's still ongoing.
Yeah, can you say a little more about that? Like, are we close to hitting our target? Are we like stress-free from here on out?
No, we are not stress-free, pretty far from that. But of course, we have like some high performers. We all have seen the numbers from India, like that's one of our high-performing countries. We have Brazil, we have Mexico. But of course, we don't want to only look at the cities who are already very much involved and have a lot of capacities at place. We also have partner countries and cities in sub-Saharan Africa. And it's also important to allow peer-to-peer learning. We do study tours from African cities to Indian cities to learn from each other, to actually get to the commitments. We are in numbers, more than half of the 100,000 are already reached in commitments to procurement. But yeah, I think we shouldn't stop at 100,000, actually, to be honest. Like, I think we should actually go higher and go further. So this is where we stand.
That's great. I mean, it's definitely encouraging, but also let's keep in mind our target of 10 million buses if we're going to get there. So certainly we still have our work cut out for us. So Nicholas, I hope you don't mind that you're surrounded by all these capable women on stage. Can you tell us a little bit about the perspective from the World Bank? We're sitting here, and obviously all of us are always very intrigued to hear about the perspective of the bank. What are you all doing to advance sustainable mobility? I know you just came out with a report about the economics of electric mobility. So can you just tell us your perspective, what your commitments are, what your targets are, what you see as the path forward?
Yes, thank you, Heather. And I'm really glad that you put together this session, because there is no silver bullet to reach our climate ambitions in transport. And it's very clear that if we want to achieve our climate objectives, we need every tool in the toolbox. One framework that is well known in the transport community and that we are trying to use at the World Bank each time we engage on the design of a particular sustainable transport program with a country or a city is this avoid, shift and improve framework. And I think that's a very simple way to think about all these dimensions and everything we need to think about if we want to achieve our ambitions. Avoid unnecessary trip, bring people closer to their work, make organized cities so that they have to travel less. And this is an agenda that obviously goes much beyond the transport sector, and where we have to work in very close collaboration with our colleagues who are working on urban development and on city planning. Shift to cleaner modes of transportation, public transport, active mobility, biking, urban rail, and improve the carbon intensity of each transport mode. And that's where electric mobility come in the picture. And we should never oppose those various pillars, because it's not either or, it's and we all need those. And I think the study that you released show this very clearly. You know, there are a lot of synergies between those various policy interventions. And I like very much your concept of compact cities, because it's an agenda that is particularly relevant for some of the poorest countries we work with. And I'm thinking in the Africa region. I mean, we did some research some years ago showing that Africa is urbanizing very, very quickly. But that urbanization is so fast that the city planning cannot follow. No? And so what happens is that African cities tend to be not as dense as what they should be, and that's why people have to spend so much time in commuting and so much money also. So that's an agenda that is really very relevant for those cities, and this is why we try at the World Bank really to cover all these and bring all the tools in our toolbox. We have a lot of demand to build mass transit systems. BRTs are really growing. We used on the African continent, there was one BRT project 10 years ago that we were supporting in Lagos. Now we have 14, and the demand is growing. Every African city has a mobility challenge today, and congestion challenge. And now we see also secondary cities. I think that will be the next frontier in secondary cities also having a similar problem. So we need to work on to keep on the good work on mass transit, electrifying, bringing e-buses whenever we can, and the economics of e-buses is pretty strong. No, you mentioned this study that we released at the last COP. In almost all of the countries we studied, where you monetize everything, air pollution, GHG benefits, it makes sense. No, but we also need to think about active mobility, biking, walking. People move differently in the developing world. Very few people have individual cars, and so the options are walking, biking, taking informal transport, or taking public transportation when it exists. No, so I think that's one new area. Where we see more and more demand from mayors, from countries, and we need all these tools. No. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I want to maybe dig into one of the elements that I think is maybe the most challenging. Certainly would love to talk about cycling, but maybe the actual transit-oriented development, the urban planning itself, that's at the core of all of this, and such, as you just said, such an enormous challenge in cities that are growing all over the world, especially the ones that are growing so fast, like Africa. I know in so many places they're now having these models of like, let's just create a lot of satellite cities to take the pressure off the main city, but then it's like, oh goodness, that's just gonna lead to sprawl, right? So what is the bank doing to try to focus on that core urban planning element?
So, as I was saying, it goes beyond the hardcore transport, and this is where we need to work with bringing some other expertise. No, the problem is that and this is very well known, but very often the cities are fragmented institutionally. So you have this challenge of how do you bring together all the various stakeholders. Sometimes, I'm thinking about a city like Accra in Ghana. I can't remember how many sub-municipalities there are, but there should be something like 15 or 20. So, and every single sub-municipality has a particular, politics. Sometimes you have political tensions, you have different interests. So bringing all these stakeholders together is not easy. That's some of the work that many cities are trying to push by creating transit authorities. And beyond transit authorities, in institutions that can look at cities globally and have this bigger long-term vision of how you organize cities. But it's not easy. It's not easy, but I think coming back to this active mobility agenda, which has been booming so much since COVID because people started to change their behavior. What I think is encouraging is that more and more we see mayors coming and seeing the biking agenda as an opportunity to rethink their cities. No, so it's not just about building kilometers of bike lanes. It's taking advantage of how do we reshape, rethink the way we organize our cities around this agenda. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Margarita, I'm going to turn to you next, just because I feel like I don't want to go right in the row. So Margarita, you have worked at all levels on sustainable transportation. Right now, you are part of the Clean Energy Works team, which I know is really focusing on financing, because we know that at the core of this, a lot of the challenges around financing. And you've had some really great success stories from Latin America, here in the US. Can you share a little bit about what you're learning and what the audience can be inspired by?
Good. Well, hi, everybody. I'm so excited to be here at TT for many, many years. Also speaking at the plenary. Thank you for coming to listen to us. We are not going to discuss the either or. We're going to all say and. So please raise your hand if you say we need compact and electrified cities. Thank you. I hope everybody raised their hand, because I don't want this debate. We want to stop the debate. We advocates, decision makers, we need to work together is what we had to do. And I want to pick up where Holmes, my colleague and boss here, who was yesterday at the plenary, mentioned. There are barriers. That's why these things are not happening together, because we're facing barriers at the local level. My organization is very small. You may not have heard of us, Clean Energy Works. We're very young too, but we work to accelerate investments in the clean energy economy that benefit all. And what way we think this will happen, Heather, is by bringing all these stakeholders that Nicola was saying is so hard to bring together. And I hope the World Bank can do that. You guys have a very big name in bringing people together, because we need to bring utilities, city planners, transport professionals, the economic departments, the finance departments, all together to solve these problems. And yes, we're finding good success stories and good, very challenging stories to make this happen. Also, to coordinate among national level policies, local policies. And I feel like these forums are the place for us to really bring our brains and see, well, what are the incentives that we have at our disposal? What are the innovations that we have at our disposal to bring people together? So I'm happy to dig deeper into this, but yeah, I just want us to use this time to pick our brains.
Well, can you give us an example? Take those lofty ideas and give us an example of something that's working?
Yes. So thank you. I prepared this. One example, and I told Insa and Nicola that I was going to pick them. So we're working with C40 and ICCT and Francisco here in Medellin, Colombia. Everybody loves Bogota, because Bogota, and here are the decision makers who made this happen. It's a city that brought almost 2,000 electric buses. I work on electric buses. But if you go beyond Bogota, you go to Medellin, which is the second largest city, you don't see that success story, because it's much difficult. The governance structure is much difficult. Not all the public transport is integrated. We have still informal transport operators, and it's been very hard to make the case. So the challenge, and I want Insa and Nicola to think about ideas, is that we have informal transport operators who want to electrify their fleet to improve public transportation, the compact part of this. They want to have a better service. But because they are in the informal side of the transport and of the governance, there is no financial structure that works for them. We have the Inter-American Development Bank working with a national development bank called Bancoldex, trying to open a line of credit. We brought the electric utility EPM, which is the Empresas Públicas de Medellín, to help them with a system called Energy as a Service, which is based on a model called Pay As You Save, in which we're saving and we can pay with the savings when you buy an electric bus. We have all the elements, the utility, the banks, the operators, and we couldn't make it happen. Because these operators are informal sector, they don't have the creditworthiness, and they didn't have anybody to mitigate the risk. We've been trying to bring the city, we talked to the friends at the World Bank, and it's just like, it's one of those challenges that I don't see the solutions unless we kind of put all of our minds together. So I don't know Insa from GIZ, and I'm part of Tumi too. And Nicola, what solutions do you think we can find to solve issues like that one?
Thank you. And just to be clear, that model has worked elsewhere, right? So we know that that model can work. It's just that this is a particularly challenging case.
Where we need the transit agencies to be creditworthy.
Yeah. I should say particularly challenging, yet very common, right? It's the same situation we see. And Fernanda, to turn to you, where the rubber really hits the road, so to speak, from the city level, working in Mexico City, I know that there has been a lot of success already with electrification. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about that, but also about all the other incredible things that Mexico City has been doing to really elevate public transportation, walking, cycling that is at the core of this. And then maybe you can also elaborate on one of the things that you're working on right now, which has to do with the microbuses and the informal. So just maybe set the context for us in all of the big challenges and success that you're having in Mexico City right now.
Thank you, Heather, and thank you, ITDP, for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here and be a representative of the government. Governments, we are the key stakeholders on the implementation of these electrified compact cities, and we need to believe in what we're doing. I think that Mexico City is a great example of how things can change in 15 years. If you have visited recently Mexico City, you can see the difference on the streets. And we have this specific strategy promoting public transit and promoting cycling and walking. We believe that even though it's a mega city, we have a lot of 15-minute cities inside Mexico City. What we have done in the last months, we just started an electrification process. We opened 2 weeks ago our first BRT line with just autonomous battery vehicles, electric vehicles. We opened and also a BRT line with trolleys. That is the first one of this type. And it's impressive because it reduced the travel time from 45 minutes to 15 minutes in the lowest income areas of the city. We need to talk about social justice and equity. We need to put this in the center of the public policy discussion. We have 3 new cable cars that were just opened in Mexico City. 2 of them are the largest of the world. We got a Guinness World Record. But it's not only how we electrified, but how we prioritize public transit, how we prioritize the lowest income areas, and how we make this compact city. I think that Mexico City also has promoted this active mobility. That's why I like the most of this report of ITDP, is that we're not only speaking about technology of electric vehicles, we're speaking about how technology with the city design can make a big difference for the climate change. So in the case of compact city design, Mexico City has promoted active mobility. I've been a cyclist myself for the last 12 years in Mexico City, and it's impressive. We've just built 240 kilometers of segregated cycle lanes. One of them is Insurgentes, that is the largest avenue, one of the largest avenues in the world, and it's amazing how many cyclists you see on the city, how many people are rethinking the way they move just by building this safe infrastructure. Also, compact cities gender perspective. We're building better sidewalks. I think that many Latin American and Mexican cities with this violence on the streets, we need to reduce the harassment that women suffer every day. So we have this feminist perspective sidewalk strategy where we're building better illuminated sidewalks. So it's a big thing happening in Mexico City. It's sidewalk, cycling, transport, electrification. But there are also a lot of barriers and challenges. I'm in charge of the public transport direction that has to convert almost 16,000 paratransit buses. There are semi-formal buses, but are the oldest ones. Some of them are older than me, more than 36 years old. And we're converting them into formal transport companies. And it's a big challenge because we cannot speak to them about electric buses because it's a big debt. They have all these financial barriers to get the credits to buy new and technology buses. We were speaking with Nicola about the barrier of the funding that just get to the national level and not to the local level. Cities, we get technical assistance, but we don't get the funding to get the charging infrastructure, how we're gonna transform these buses that attend the 70% total transport trips in Mexico City. So we have big challenges. Just on Monday, we announced that we're gonna stray almost 4,000 microbuses, that are these old buses, and turn them into 1,000 new buses that are gonna be subsidized by Mexico City government. We're gonna give the transport sector 60% of the total cost of a Euro 6 bus. We're hopefully in 10 years that they have to renew their fleet, we're going to have electric buses. And I think that also compact cities help us start thinking that electrification is not only the buses or the cars. It's how we attend this last and first mile with 2- and 3-wheelers that can be pedal assisted, how we speak about electric taxis that attend this demand. So I think that there's a big debate going on here. So representing the government, being seated with the World Bank, having these the Tumi perspective and the climate perspective, it's amazing to start discussing how we can transform our cities, how we can redesign our cities, and how we can include this electric technology to have a better and bigger fight for climate change. So thank you for the invitation.
Bravo, bravo. Wow. Got a lot going on there. I mean, really, like, we like to talk about the compact city scenario as the love story, and I think you just gave the love story so well about how all of these things are working together, and we have to get started on everything now. We can't wait for the perfect silver bullet, Nicholas, as you said. And just to like pull out a couple of elements of that, I mean, one thing that I thought was so bold for Mexico City is to do the trolley buses. And just to be clear, if ever people don't know what that means, it's like the overhead electric lines that a lot of cities put up in the 70s or around there, and they were just sitting there basically unused. So why not use them, right? Like, they don't have to all be battery electric, which is of course great, but also just looking at an asset that could be used and thinking creatively about it, while at the same time putting battery electric buses on the street and doing cycling and doing all of the things. But just to like think about, like, every city is starting in a different place. How can we use what we've got to focus on all of the elements at once? And I think that's a really interesting thing to pull out of that love story. So Nicholas, I might turn to you because there's been a lot of discussion around some of the challenges that maybe the World Bank can be at the center of. And I don't want to put you on the spot because we know that you all have a lot of power, but you can't solve everything. There's some real challenges here. So I don't know, maybe you want to speak to this, the conundrum of the informal transit fleets, and how, is there something that we can do to address that? And also, you know, the challenge of so much finance needed at the city level, and what are the challenges in really addressing that from the World Bank's perspective?
No, happy to do that. So the question of Margarita is has always been a challenge, not only for us but for all multilateral development banks. You know, we work with governments, national governments, and going to the subnational level is always a challenge, no? Because we need to find the right vehicle to do this. We need obviously to get the agreement of the national government. When we go down, we need, you know, we call a sovereign guarantee to. So there is all sorts of complexity about engaging at the subnational level, but it doesn't mean that we can do it. And in fact, because many of the challenges today in urban mobility are in secondary cities, we've been engaging in this area for a long time, and in all sorts of countries. You know, I could give you the example of a program we designed in Colombia many years ago, targeting a number of secondary cities. A similar program we had in Argentina. Recently, we are supporting Kumasi in their urban mobility program, which is the second city in Ghana. But even in a country like Haiti, you know, we are working with Cape Haitian, which is also the second cities in urban transport. So there are some ways to do that. I would say the ideal scenario is when a country is approaching us and telling us, "I want some help to deepen our decentralization reform," because then instead of having a bit of an ad hoc approach where you pick up a few cities, and you know there are always consideration about which city you pick. No, that's where politics get into the picture sometimes. But if you work within a decentralization framework, you can achieve much more because then you can work at the system level, and that's always the best scenarios. Now it's much more complex. It takes much more time because then you have to get about political decentralization, fiscal decentralization, how you build up capacity at the subnational level. But in the long term, I think that's what pays off the most. And we have some couple of good examples in Chile several years ago, or in Peru also, of such a successful program. No? And then it's interesting because transport becomes an entry point for a much broader conversation about decentralization, empowerment, devolution of responsibilities at the subnational level.
Maybe just a quick follow-up question. I mean, so there's a lot of people in the room here from NGOs, research institutes, other government organizations, and we all are here because we want to do our part, right? So are there things that we can do to help you make those connections to those possibilities of working at the subnational level? Are there things that we can do to help point those opportunities out or to lay the ground for those opportunities?
So, rallying all stakeholders along a common vision is always difficult. No? It's difficult because of the fragmentation of cities. It's difficult because, some of the conversation and some of the tension we heard here at TT about the model shift. And so an initiative like this one, I think, helps because you are trying to bring together the tools that are needed to move forward. Now, instead of spending time in discussing, well, should we electrify or should we promote bicycles? I mean, or should we densify cities? I mean, let's bring all this together, and develop that. Let's develop that vision together. So everything that can be done in that arena, I think, is very helpful. No?
Great, thank you. I also just want to put a plug in for SUMP, Sustainable Urban Mobility Plans. Yesterday, I was in a conversation, and I know a lot of organizations are working on SUMPs and trying to gather around SUMPs, but I heard if every city has a Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan, it just makes it such an easier place to start for these conversations, for looking at finance. So I think that's something that we all can collectively contribute to, and it's at the core of the Compact City Scenario Electrified. Insa, I want to turn to you because I think it really is courageous, again, that you all are focused on something that is so at the core of this, electric public transportation, and again, public transportation being the very important part of that. I know that you're also really focused on gender. So can you tell me why those two things are such high priorities for you and how they come together?
Yes, but I also want to quickly answer.
Oh, please, and comment on any of the things that have been discussed before.
I think I can keep it very short because we don't have the answers yet. I think also all of us as a transport community, I think we are lacking good and best practice in how to tackle informal and paratransit. And I think we overlooked it for a long time. So I see there's an increase in interest, and we have now like an upcoming project with EU in Cameroon, and it's also like focusing strongly on the informal transport sector. And I feel that we are very much at the beginning. So I couldn't agree more. And I like also the discussions about like calling it popular transport and something. I think we are now starting to get there, a little late, I have to admit. So I think that is, you really like found our weak spot. We are not where we should be. In contrast to gender, so, the connection between gender and mobility is for us something that's very, very close to our heart. And it's not just like ticking a box and a sideline. Yeah, we also look at women in one study. So for us, it's at the core of what we do. And we started our Women Mobilize Women initiative in 2018. And it's now 5 years along the line. And I have to admit, like, it wasn't always easy because it never got the resources, the visibility that it should have deserved. We now have, like from German side, like a new government, and we have a very strong governmental commitment towards feminist foreign policy and feminist development policy. And for us, it's very powerful. Also to put the word feminist on front, and I think many of you will think like that's kind of an activist word, and like what's behind that, and is that not like a little bit too strong? No, it's the exact perfect word for what we are meaning, and it's like equity in transport. And I think it could also be an option and a chance for us to move our discussion a little bit away from mitigation and decarbonization and reaching the Paris alignment. Yes, that's very important. But when we look into gender and equity and marginalized groups, it is not only participating in the workforce and getting to work, it's actually like having a life. So when we look into women in the transport sector, women in the transport workforce are less than 20%. And we don't even know that exactly because there are no disaggregated data. And on the other hand, women are the majority of public transport users. But our transport systems are designed for people going to work and coming back from work. But women move very differently in cities. We have care work, we have shorter distances, we travel with kids, with elderlies, but the transport system is not designed for us. And I don't even touch the questions about safety, harassment. I don't want to, we could do this with raise your hand if you have ever been harassed in public transport. We're not doing this yet. Because I think many of the males in the room will be shocked. So I would like really bring this into your teams, into your discussions, bring this to your home, have these really painful discussions, because that is personal. And we are very committed to do that, and also like if we transform the transport sector towards compact cities, we need to have more of half of the population at the table on all levels, as transport users, as decision makers, as transport entrepreneurs. We need them at all stages. So this is why I'm very happy that this panel looks the way it does, because that is kind of also a statement in itself.
Yeah. Bravo. Bravo. Fernanda, maybe I'll turn to you next. I mean, I guess I just want to hear what's on your mind at this moment. I'm sure there's so many things that you can react to. I mean, one thing that I thought was really interesting that you pointed out was expanding sidewalks, and just the fundamental that I was in a panel yesterday, and the question, it was on cycling, and the question was, what form of transportation did you take? And when we all really thought about it, we realized that every trip for everybody started with walking, right? Even if we got on a bike or we got on a bus or we got in a car, it all started with walking. And it's just so fundamental, yet we don't spend enough time on walking, and it's core to everything. So I really thought that was such an interesting thing that you all have been focusing on. So maybe you can elaborate on that, or any of the elements that have been brought up in the conversation as well. Maybe you want to go to the informal transit piece too, which is another conundrum, but maybe we'll focus on a bright side, which is expanding sidewalks.
No, I think that a word that we should starting to discuss is equity. When we speak about equity, sidewalks are priority because it's the lowest income people that walk the most. Women walk the most. So we need to put this in the center of our policies. How we speak about this social justice, how we improve the sidewalks. In Latin American cities, we have these awful less than 1 meter sidewalks that you cannot even walk with a stroll, or it's really hard. So we have this program that has two ideas, not only the safety, but also road safety and security issues for women. It's called Walk Free, Walk Safe. It's gender perspective, the places and the sidewalks that had the highest number of sexual harassment that had been detected in Mexico City are the priority projects where we put these better sidewalks, better illumination on the sidewalk, and people can feel safer. We saw a reduction of 23% in the violence towards women in these places, so it's amazing how we can change the city. Also, speaking about equity, is how we attend the lowest income people that live furthest away in our cities. In the case of Mexico City, that's why I put on this point what Insa said. Women are the highest users of 2- and 3-wheeler motorcycle taxis. So when we start speaking about how we improve this paratransit, we're also speaking about opportunities for the drivers and the operators of these 2- and 3-wheelers, better time opportunities, safer opportunities for women to make all these local trips, because as women we do these shorter local trips in non-peak hours, so we can attend these demands. So we need to start speaking about these paratransit trips, how we electrify them, and it could be an accelerator for these local commuting that we have in Mexico City, and I'm sure that in African, Asian, and Latin American cities we share this. So.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, again, the Compact City Scenario Electrified is about our climate change goals, but here we are talking about the importance of gender, and I think it's just so fundamental that we understand like the very core of it. It's 50% of our population, so if we're not making sure that that works, then we can't solve our climate change problems. And so again, we really have to work on all of these things. It's not an or. Margarita, I'm sure you have things on your mind. You can tell us whatever is on your mind, but also just, again, you gave us this challenge, but I'm sure you're already thinking about, okay, how do we move from that recognized challenge to some solutions?
I wanted to tell you the solution after you gave me your ideas. So yes, we're working, and you will be happy, Heather, to know that the solution that we're working with the advocates in Medellin is actually this synergy between compact and electrify. So we're thinking of, we all been advocating for congestion charging, parking reform, as a ways to do high modal shift. Like this is the fundamental of the transport advocates here. We want to charge the most inefficient ways of transport to fund the public and the shared mobility. But this is very difficult and politically difficult thing to do when the mayor of a city is in a different party, when the mayor is not with the majority of the city council. But we had to try. I mean, we have to try. We have no other choice. We had to reduce this many times, I forgot the number, to get to our 1.5 scenario. So what we're trying to do, and I will give you another challenge piece, what we're trying to do good is trying to quantify what would be the benefit for the city to have all these measures in place, and noting that those savings or collections that we can do with all these measures, doing it in a way that is equitable, then can be transferred to the public transit. And in the public transit, we have many things that we need to find. We need to electrify them. We need to improve the service, because I agree that we need to shift, but people will only shift if the other service is better. Take less time, is more affordable, all the things that we will ourselves do, right? We will not take something that we're going to be harassed, is expensive, and it takes 2 hours. Nobody wants that. Of course, I will do a bicycle trip too. I'm a cyclist advocate too, which is much faster. But for people who cannot take the bike, we need to have good options. So we need to have this kind of funds. And in Medellin, we're trying to find ways that we can fund this FED, and I forgot the name in Spanish. Maybe Sofia can help me what FED stands for. The Tariff Stabilization Fund. I remember. So we need those kind of funds to make sure we can close the gaps of how much is recovered through the tariff and how much it costs to provide the services. And we need to find creative ways through like the compact scenario measures. Is that not new? But on the hard things, on the challenge thing that we have, and I wanted to put it back to all of us, and we heard it yesterday. In Rio, we heard yesterday from the Prefeitura, and we heard it from other cities. We have a hard challenge is that we have not fully recovered after the pandemic. Public transportation lost passengers, of course, during the pandemic. Now in this period, still we're not at where we were before. And that means we're collecting less money on fares, meaning that FED gap is bigger. And that gap that we need to fill, to improve it, to electrify it, to make sure that we had the high shift. So to me, again, this calls for even more multi-stakeholder. Like we need to be talking about what are the recovery scenarios in every country and how we link transportation to all these agendas, because it's about how we recover our economy, make people back to work, and use public transportation. So to me, it's not a transportation dilemma. We are transportation professionals, but we need to be talking to the economy ministries. I mean, we had to go to their conferences and have a transport side event. I don't know, bring the economy ministries more to COP. I know we tried, but we had to do this more.
Nikolai, I saw you give me a look. You have something to say?
No, I wanted to say something about inclusive transport, no? Because this is something we understood a long time ago, that it's not only a question of making transport accessible to all. It's also a development issue, because if a country wants to grow, it needs to bring more women in the workforce. And one of the main obstacles and main reason why women cannot access some jobs is because they are concerned about taking public transportation and move to go to work. No, so that's it's not only a fairness issue; it's a development issue. It's a growth story. It's an economic story. And now I must say that it's so embedded in the mindset of transport professional that I don't think we could think, at least at the World Bank, about the design of a transport project without looking at the gender dimension, no? And understanding what different transport pattern do we have between men and women. Women travel differently. They don't necessarily travel at the same time, so the frequency of buses has an importance, because they otherwise they may not be able to move. They have special needs. Obviously, fighting sexual harassment is critical. Bringing women in the workforce is also an agenda that is very relevant. So I think we've learned a lot, but we still need to do more. It keeps coming back in the survey that it remains an obstacle. It remains an issue. There have been some interesting policies, like the pink car stories. No, I mean some cities, some countries try to have specific cars in their transport system for women. We did an evaluation of that a couple of years ago, mostly positive for the women who were in the pink car, but mostly negative for the women who were outside of the pink car. So that's an illustration that this is an area where we need to work. But again, it's not only an inclusion story, it's a much broader development agenda. No? Mm-hmm.
Thank you for sharing that perspective. And we're in total free flow here. So the fact that we've landed on this topic, I think, is telling of kind of the fundamental of importance and the interest here. We have just a few minutes left, and there's probably some questions from the audience, but I just want to give anybody a chance that has any last words they want to say before we turn it over to some Q&A. All right, well, I think we've heard some really great perspective from everybody. I hope this has enlightened some ideas in the audience, but yeah, Q&A, please. You're up first.
Great, thank you very much. This has been a fantastic panel. It seems that at this conference, at least, there's been general consensus that transportation of all types needs to be electrified. There's also consensus, maybe a little less so, on the need for improved active mobility to help combat climate change. In the US, it seems that those are two circles of a Venn diagram that never really connect, that there's electrification of transportation and active mobility, especially from the finance side, where there's no overlap. And as an example, in the US, you have $7.5 billion in funding for EV charging stations. None of that's available for charging e-bikes or scooters. You have a rebate for to buy an electric car. You don't have a rebate to buy an electric bike. Are there any examples that you guys can think of from, locally in the US or around the world where they're seeing like those two things are integrated? Like even on the diagram up there, you have vehicle electrification, which is cars, trucks, and buses, and then you have the little people on the bikes at the bottom. I think there's a lot of potential there, especially when e-bikes are more likely to replace car trips, and they can help actually make a city more compact by shortening distances. Thank you.
Great question. I kind of want to answer it, but I'll let one of you all. Go ahead. You are so right. I mean, yes, the potential for e-bikes is really incredible, and small things of all sorts. I mean, I think one of the conundrums there, though, is road safety, right? We know that there are more and more motorcycles on roads, and it's leading to more injuries and more deaths. So that is something that we have to be conscious of, which means we need more space for small electrified vehicles that is protected. But yes, I mean, I really think that the e-bikes e-bikes is so part of the answer, and again, electric 2- and 3-wheelers. And I think there are examples of places that are prioritizing that. There are a number of places in Europe, in particular, that are providing incentives and subsidies for the purchase of e-bikes. There are countries, we're working on a number of projects that are trying to focus on charging infrastructure for 2- and 3-wheelers. It's just coming. There's also complexities of parking and having enough room for those vehicles. I mean, I think one of the encouraging but also discouraging thing is when you see, for example, in India, one of the places that we are working on charging infrastructure, you see a place for charging for 2- and 3-wheelers, and it's surrounded by 2-wheelers, so you can't even get to it. So that shows the popularity, but it also shows the challenge of getting this right and needing a lot more space that's dedicated to this charging infrastructure, that's well thought out and is using the limited street space that we have, although we have too much of it dedicated for cars, instead turning over to charging infrastructure. So I think it's a great question, and to say we need a lot more incentives and we need a lot more thinking on that, because I think it is so fundamental to the answer. And again, thinking about the draw on our energy sector, it's such a more efficient use of our electricity, of our energy, if we can focus on smaller vehicles that are built to purpose to haul around one person, rather than giant SUVs like we like to use here in this country in particular. So,
Can I add?
yeah, please, Fernanda.
Well, I think that if we want to redistribute the space, we have to redistribute our budget. In Mexico City, a good practice is that we see bicycles as part of the public transport system. It's not just bicycles, cars, and public transport, but how we integrate public bicycles with the transit system. For example, we have Ecobici, that is the biggest bike share in Mexico City, and we have 687 stations, almost 9,000 bicycles. And we included in the mobility card, and you pay with the same card, the Ecobici system. We have bicycle parking facilities close to the biggest transport stations where you can get with your bike, and they're completely free and operated by the government. So I think that when we rethink the bicycle as part of this whole transport mobility strategy, it's easier to get the funding. It's easier to get the budget redistributed for cycle lanes, for incentives for electric bikes. So I think we should move towards that.
Can I add one thing? There are so many synergies between active mobility and mass transit solutions. Now, in many of the programs that we finance at the World Bank now, we focus on the whether it's a metro or a BRT, and in checking the complementarities between biking and the stations for those facilities. I remember seeing a program in Tianjin in China a couple of years ago, and that brings more ridership to public transport. And so that program in Tianjin had an economic rate of return ex ante of 7%, but when the program closed, it was close to 50%, just because that biking, this multimodal thinking helped increase so much the ridership. And it's also a way to make public transport more inclusive, when you can extend those bike lanes in those poor neighborhoods. So there are really a lot of synergies between the two.
Yeah, that's great. I think, yeah, the idea of multimodal hubs also is an area that we see all of these things coming together, and a lot more investment on that, with the recognition that active mobility, walking, cycling, especially cycling and e-bikes, is a huge part of that. And the fundamentals of just bike parking, room for bike parking, and it leads to greater revenue on our public transport systems, which we know is such a challenge. I'm afraid we're out of time, but there's at least 3 or 4 folks with questions. So I'm going to steal a card from the first panel and the great moderator there, and say, come on up afterwards and please bring your questions up front, and we would love to continue the conversation. Thank you so much to incredible panelists, and thank you all for coming, and yeah, enjoy the rest of your TT.
also, this is fundamental to yes, we are. Yeah. Which is, so it's not like a, right? That's what we're about. But do that hit both and electric, because I think the stuff is